promotion exams. So, like we know, we want to talk about procurement, and we'll try and look at those salient things about procurement. We know we are not procurement professionals, but we expect that you should know some basic things about procurement that are likely to, they can ask you during your procurement, during your promotion exams, rather. So some of the things we're going to look at, you'll see on the screen now. We'll try and look at the definition of public procurement. We'll look at the institutional frameworks for public procurement, and then the functions of those institutional frameworks, the composition of those things. And we'll also look at the principles or objectives of public procurement process. Why do we really need to do public procurement? And then a bit of our procurement methods, consultancy selection methods, and then we'll also look at disposal. Disposal is one of the key functions of procurement, so we'll want to go through that. As we go on, let's agree on some protocols. Do you want us to take questions as we go on, or you want to note your questions and we come up with them later? So what's the thinking of the members of the House? You can unmute and let me know. Do you want us to take questions as we go on, or we'll take questions at the end of the presentation?
Hello, sir.
We'll take questions at the end of the presentation, sir.
Okay. So take note of the questions and then we'll take it at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Okay, so last week we started talking about buying and then the difference between buying and procurement.
I can't do Roblox and do movies. So let me just let you know now. The bed is in January. I can't see. The laptop, I need to sort it out.
Please, let's unmute our mics now.
Okay.
I'm checking it.
Okay. Can we go on? All right, so I said we started talking about the difference between buying and procurement. And I told us that buying is just the exchange of legal tender for the goods, works, and services that we need. So we can go to the market and buy a laptop. So you need a laptop, you have your funds, you go to ICM or you go to Ikeja market and you buy what you need. The difference between that and procurement is that even though you are acquiring the same laptop, for procurement, you do it within 13 given guidelines, principles.
Excuse us, please. So,
Please, can you mute every mic? Please.
Okay, so we can go on now. So we just said that buying means you're going to exchange your legal tender for the items you need. But when you talk about procurement, you do that within certain conditions. There are rules. There are conditions guiding, there are laws and principles guiding that your exchange of your money or your legal tender for the item you need. If you want to buy for yourself, you just go to the store and you exchange and you go. But when you are procuring, you follow certain principles. For instance, you don't just buy what you have not planned for. You probably would have had plans on ground that at such a time you are going to acquire that item, that good, that works, or that service. So for procurement, there has to be planning, there has to be appropriation of funds for it. And there's a procedure. Like in the service here, a lot of us, when our procurement officer says, you want to buy this, we have to do a process. So some of us will say, no, you are delaying us, you are doing this. The procurement officer will say, you have to extend document to the service provider. The service provider must be registered, it must respond, it must go through certain eligibility criteria, then we evaluate and all this and all that and all that. It is not for fun that procurement officers will ask for that. It is because the law requires that we do that. The regulations and the manuals require that we do that. And that's the difference between when you are buying and when you are procuring. When you are buying, you just exchange for yourself and you go on. But when you are procuring, you must obey these laws. For instance, if you want to buy, you don't just go to one person and buy. You make it open. We talk about open competitive bidding. You make it competitive. It's not just one person that will come to you and you just buy the item, or you ask the fellow to carry out that your works or that your service for you. But when you are adopting procurement, you must follow rules and regulations. Some of all these rules we are going to look at later. Now, we know that we can have private procurement. That means private procurement within a private organization. There are a couple of firms that do really good standard procurement. You talk about some blue chip companies, Mobile, Chevron, a lot of all these manufacturing firms, even up to some private construction firms now have very well laid out procurement departments. The basic difference between the procurement of the private organizations and the one we do in public sector is that the fundamental principles of procurement in the private sector rest on the laws, or the, not even laws this time, the rules guiding the operations of that private firm. And largely, profit making is the target of most of our private organizations. That is not so in public organizations, because we know we don't look out for profits in public organizations like we have in our ministries, agencies, and departments here. A lot of times we carry out activities just for social benefit. We don't look at profit, and then we don't have one person just giving us rules. We have rules and chains and levels of regulations and oversight functions to obey when you're carrying out public procurement. So for between public and private procurement, there's a few differences there. Then largely, you find out that for public procurement, the rules and regulations and guidelines are well spelled out, and they have chains of them, they have levels of them. Whereas in private procurement, you just rely on the thinking of the leadership of that private firm and the level to which they give guidance on what they want to do. And then the guiding principle or the objective in a lot of our private organization is profit making. Whereas for public enterprises or public offices, we don't really talk about profit. We look at a lot of other things before we take decisions. So conclusively, what we have on the screen now is what we want to take as the definition of public procurement. So public procurement, will say, is the acquisition of, is the professional process of acquisition of goods, works, and services by public entities, that is, ministries, departments, and agencies of government, applying public funds to meet their ministerial responsibilities and assignments to the citizens of the state. Now, the key thing there now is that you are applying public funds. These public funds may be appropriated or may not be appropriated. Appropriated means it's in your budget. Sometimes you spend funds that are not in our budget. You have grants, you have other things that come up that are not budgeted for, basically grants. But even when you are spending such funds, you must adopt public procurement principles and practices for the spending of such funds in public enterprise. So I hope we're okay with that definition of public procurement. It is a professional process for the acquisition of goods, works, and services by public entities, applying public funds to meet their ministerial responsibilities and assignment. So what is key there is the application of public funds to this assignment. And then we also want to look at the differences between goods, works, and services. Goods are those tangible things that you can touch, you can feel, and are movable. Movable in the sense that you can have it here today and you take it there, take it to another point tomorrow. It starts from as little as pen, stationaries, chairs, air conditioning, to vehicle, heavy earth-moving equipment, even up to planes. So if the ministry, if the office of Chief of Staff wants to acquire a new plane or helicopter for the governor of Lagos State, it still falls under the acquisition of goods. The same process as when you're acquiring stationaries, even though the threshold may sometimes introduce a bit of differences in the way you adopt it. Now, works are those tangible things that are usually immovable. So you're talking about bridges, talking about roads, talking about buildings and all that. You know, once you have a road constructed, it remains at that point. It's not what you can move from point A to point B, like you can move your cars, your chairs, and all that. And then most times, works items come about via the admixture. You put some things together to put them in place. They don't just come as standalone. The third category, which is services, can further be broken down to two sets: consulting services and non-consulting services. The consulting services, for want of a better word, are those things that are intellectually based, and they're based on intellectual capacity of the man that is delivering it. High level performance. Those are done by those we call consultants. For instance, if you invite an accounting firm to look at the books of your ministry or your office, that's a consulting service that that firm is rendering to you. Or when you go to see a doctor to have a check on you and a couple of other things. It's interesting to know that in the field of engineering, you can have consultants who offer consulting services, and you can have contractors who offer works services. So if you have if you request or you engage a firm to build your 10-story building for you, that's works contract. But the consulting firm, the engineering consulting firm that comes up with the design and all those drawings and the things you need for that building is a consultant, is offering a consultancy service. You know, there's a difference between the man, even though some firms do both, but the company that comes up with your drawing and every other thing you have is different from the company that will sometimes do the actual construction work for you. So you have consultants there. You can also have what we call non-consulting service providers. The non-consulting service providers are not as intellectually based as the consulting service providers. We give examples of those as, say, janitorial services, you have catering services, and a couple of other things like that. Security services. They don't leave any product for you most times, except for catering services. Sometimes you have the food and the drinks that you take. But one key difference between the non-consulting service and the consulting service is that usually the non-consulting services will not give you reports, whereas the consulting service will give you reports of their work, and they are highly intellectually based. That's the consulting services. And the non-consulting services are not that intellectually based. At least you cannot, even though they still use their brains and some level of perfection and training, but you won't compare the services of a security man to that of an accountant or a medical doctor and all that. So that's the difference there. So when you get to go through the process of engaging them, these differences will clearly show. And that's why they are treated separately as consulting services and non-consulting services. So conclusively, we also say that public procurement is not a routine administrative duty, but it's a structured process implemented by trained professionals based on set core values, laws, procedures, principles, and all these procedures and principles are aimed at achieving some predetermined objectives. The reason you do all this is because you want to achieve something. We have a reason for carrying out public procurement. So, for instance, you want to state that some time ago, before public procurement came to be in the state or even in the nation, the World Bank came and carried out what they call the country assessment of procurement in Nigeria. And it was said then that for every 100 naira that government spend in Nigeria, we lose 70 naira and only get value for 30 naira. Hence, the slogan of procurement, they say value for money. We carry out procurement processes to achieve greater value for money spent. That's why we do procurement. So we see that we have core values, we have procedures and principles to follow because we want to achieve a predetermined objective of having value for money spent. And getting this value for money spent will come via the proper adoption of public procurement processes. So the next thing you'll see on the screen there is a ball, a round circle. This tells us in a nutshell the entire process that procurement goes through for adoption or for implementation. It starts with planning. Like it said all times, that when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So procurement in its own way too starts with planning. Like I said earlier, when you are buying, though you have your level of buying, you might have been proposing that the acquisition of that laptop for months and you have your plans towards it, you stop spending the money and stuff like that. But largely, buying does not entail full-scale planning like we are going to see that we do in procurement. But for procurement, the first step is to plan. And in planning, we are saying that the entity, that's your ministries, department, and agencies, that sometimes we also call them procuring entity, would have engaged in what we call the preparation of your procurement plan in the outgoing year. So for 2025, in 2024, late 2024, we would have gone through the process of preparing our procurement plan for 2025. Preparation of procurement plan means that you would have to do needs assessment, you prioritize and you categorize your needs. So if you come to a ministry, for instance, PSO here now, when the PPC is sitting as procurement plan committee, when they're sitting, you bring up all your needs through all the departmental heads. All departmental heads will sit together in a committee that we call the procurement planning committee. to articulate all your needs for the forthcoming year. You will categorize these needs. You also prioritize them. And then you see that everything that we need for next year, we have funds for it. We have a schedule as to when those items should be bought. So we'll get to talk more about the procurement plan committee as one of the major structures for or major frameworks for the implementation of public procurement in our various MDAs. But suffice it to say that you start procurement process with planning, where you plan by telling us all you need. The user departments at this time will state or will provide the specifications for all the things we want to do. For instance, if ICT wants to buy laptop for us, they'll tell us the gig, the RAM, and every other thing concerning that laptop. If we are to put up a building or construct a road, the user department, this time the technical department, the engineers, will prepare their bills of quantity, and give us their in-house estimate for that construction that we hope to carry out. Even for services, the user departments will come up with the terms of reference for the consultant that you want to engage. It's important to note that it is not the responsibility of the procurement department in our various MDAs to prepare the specifications for the items we need, the bill document for the works we want to do, or the terms of reference for the consultant we want to engage. All these items, all these documents and information will be provided by the user department. So after the preparation of the procurement plan, and that will dovetail to your budget, because it is what you have on your procurement plan that you would provide for, you provide funds for. So the procurement plan is just a table that tells us the things we want to do, the times we want to do them, that's expenditure lines, and how we intend to carry out that process. So you do that. Part of planning also is to ensure that you have funds appropriated for those expenditure lines. In procurement, it's not best practice for you to commence any form of procurement without funds being made available to take care of the needs of that expenditure line. So after planning, you go to request documentation. Here you prepare the bidding documents and every other technical documents that will be extended to the service providers. After the extension of the document to the service provider under what we call approach to market, the service providers would return what we call their bids or their proposals to your request and return to you within the stipulated time. These bids and proposals returned by the service providers will be evaluated. To find out the ones that meet our requirements, and we call that the most responsive evaluated bidder. At the time we prepare our document, we would have stated the eligibility criteria. Eligibility criteria meaning those criteria that the bidders must meet to be able to do business with you. Sometimes these eligibility criteria will include that the firm is a corporate body, it has a CAC registration, the firm's directors and even the firm itself pay taxes. Sometimes we require that these firms also register with the Lagos State Public Procurement Agency, and then a couple of other requirements can come in for us to really assess and conclude that the firm in question is eligible to do business with us. So we'll talk about firms that are responsive and eligible to do business with us. All this we'll find out during the evaluation process. So after the evaluation, you'll negotiate and you do contract signature. But I need to state here that a lot of times, not absolutely, you don't negotiate works and goods. What it means is that if a contractor or a supplier gives you his rate for the work or the cost of the item they want to supply or you've requested for them to supply. You cannot negotiate that price. But for services, you can go through a negotiation process. But at a higher level, you still get to be told that there are still some works and goods that you can negotiate. But when we get to that level, we'll tell why that is possible. But at this stage, suffice it to just note that negotiation is restricted to services, provision of services. So after negotiation and signing of contract, then you go on to contract startup. You start the contract, the supplier will bring in the goods and every other thing as you had requested for. You go to contract management and then contract closure. The last quadrant there speaks to disposal. Disposal too is a very, very important and cogent part of procurement. Disposal is what we are used to under name boarding. You say you bought cars, you bought this and that and that. These are all procurement. And the law states that every procuring entity is also a disposing entity. The implication of that is that any item that you procure in your MDA, in your ministries, departments, and agency, same ministry that acquired these items are enabled and empowered by law to dispose of these items. And you cannot dispose of an item that is not bought by you. I give an example. If the PSO or the Chief of Staff Office procure vehicle for our commissioners, our permanent secretaries, and even maybe heads of department, if that procurement wasn't done with the funds of your ministry cannot dispose of those vehicles. It is the responsibility of the procuring entity, now talking about PSO or Chief of Staff Office or any other such office of government that procure those vehicles. They are the only ones that are enabled by law and empowered by law to dispose of the items they have procured. So disposal is a part of procurement, and I think later on in this presentation we'll talk a little bit more about disposal. So that's in a nutshell, that's what procurement is all about. That's the cycle that you go through to implement procurement. So I want to quickly, are we still on? Can I continue? Hello?
Yes, we're still on.
Yes, you can continue.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I
But
just
we
need to
are
Yes,
on
sir, you can
our agenda.
continue.
thank you. I just need to confirm that we are still together. Right, so we want to now talk about institutional frameworks for the implementation of public procurement. What do we mean by institutional framework? These are the bodies, the structures, the enabling environment for us to implement public procurement. So we said that the institutional frameworks are the sets of formal laws, rules, norms, and organizational structure that are recognized for the purpose of achieving organizational goals and objectives in what we do. So we're saying that there are some laws, there are some organizational structures that you need to have in place for the purpose of achieving your organizational goals through procurement. These institutional structures are essential for the determination and attainment of organizational goals and objectives in our various MDAs. These institutional frameworks include the following. At the peak of it, we have the Lagos State Public Procurement Agency and the board of the agency. The agency, I must state, is a regulatory body. The Lagos State Public Procurement Agency is a regulatory agency with oversight functions on all our procurement activities. What it means is that every ministry, department, and agency of government carry out their procurement themselves. The agency does not conduct procurement process for our various ministries, departments, and agencies. But you know you have your procurement officers with you who stay with you and do or implement procurement processes for you there, but come to the agency for levels of review and the purpose of obtaining no objections or clearance to go on with the work as they are going on. So the agency only exercises oversight functions to control and ensure that everyone complies with the provisions of the Lagos State Public Procurement Law 2021. But suffices to note and state clearly that every procuring entity is responsible for their procurement process whole and whole. This is a major departure from what we used to have prior before the advent of public procurement. We will recall that we had the State Tenders Board, STB, and the State Consultancy Board before the advent of Lagos State Public Procurement Agency and the Public Procurement Law. Then we had a centralized, before procurement, we had a centralized procurement system where everybody goes to the State Tenders Board for their procurement process. But with the advent of the Public Procurement Law, we've decentralized procurement to all MDAs. Every MDA carries out his or her own procurement within his own entity, only goes to the agency for some levels of reviews and clearance, and to obtain no objection to activities that we've gone through. The board and the agency is also working with a governing board. The governing board of the Lagos State Public Procurement Agency consists of 3 executive council members, the Director General of Lagos State Public Procurement Agency, and 3 other members representing NGOs and professional bodies. So you may be asked the number of members of the governing board, or who really are the members of the governing board of Lagos State Public Procurement Agency. So we have 3 EXCO members, and these 3 EXCO members are the Commissioner for Justice and Attorney General of the state, the Commissioner for Budget and Planning, and then the Commissioner for Finance. Commissioner for Finance serves as the chairman of the board of the governing board of the Lagos State Public Procurement Agency. So these are things I think we should know. The Director General of Lagos State Public Procurement Agency is the secretary of the governing board. Then we have 3 other members representing professional bodies and non-governmental organizations, and those other organizations that are involved in ensuring equity and justice in the society. The next structure we want to look at is that we must have our accounting officer in our procuring entity. By the way, the accounting officer is the permanent secretary or the general manager, the managing director, executive secretaries, as the case may be, in our various MDAs. They are the accounting officers for our procurement process. The accounting officer takes responsibility for all our actions, whether they are right or wrong. So the accounting officer of our entity is at the peak, at the head of our activities of procurement in our various MDAs. You also have the procurement office in our various MDAs to work with the accounting officer in ensuring that we carry out our processes properly in our various MDAs. We have 3 other committees that are very important to the adoption or implementation of public procurement in our various MDAs. The first is the Procurement Planning Committee, like I had mentioned earlier. This committee consists of all heads of departments and units of the procuring entity. All heads of departments and units of the procuring entity and the accounting officer. The accounting officer is the chairman of the Procurement Planning Committee, the PPC. Then all heads will serve in the committee. On the committee, the head of the procurement unit will be the secretary of that committee. The essence or the responsibility of this committee is to draw up the procurement plan of the procuring entity. That's what the planning committee does. So it's like a family meeting where we all come together to make our demands and then share the assets of the family, this time the entity. Then we get there and ensure that everybody gets the best he can for what you want to do. Sometimes, like I said, we do prioritization. Sometimes we drop some items, we merge, we increase and all that. So that at the end of the day, we'll come up with our procurement plan, which is a table that shows all the expenditure lines and the activities that the entity intends to implement the forthcoming year. We'll also talk about when and how much we are going to engage in those assignments or expenditure lines. These are the things we do in the procurement planning committee. So this procurement plan that you come up with, we also say is a living document. The meaning of that is that after drawing up your procurement plan, you could or may still have some other expenditure lines or some other activities that you do not cater for. Maybe some force majeure and things that you never knew you will need. You can always come back, sit together again as that procurement planning committee and adjust it to accommodate any new expenditure that you had left out. But no one can sit on his own, say the procurement officer or the accounting officer, to tweak the procurement plan behind the members of the procurement planning committee. Because what we've all agreed to do together, if we have cost to change it, everyone will still be involved in the amendments or adjustments that have been done to the procurement plan. For that reason, we say the procurement plan is a living document because you can always amend it from time to time. The next committee there is the one we call the Ministerial Tenders Board or the Parastatal Tenders Board. This board is the highest decision-making body, or this committee is the highest decision-making body for the procuring entity. It's the highest decision-making body for the entity. All decisions made by this committee will be binding. It will be binding on everyone. The composition of the tenders board is the accounting officer as the secretary, as the chairman, the procurement office as the secretary, and any 4 heads of department at the discretion of the accounting officer. I'll take it again. The composition of the tenders board, as stated in the Public Procurement Law 2021, has the accounting officer as the chairman of the tenders board, ministerial or parastatal tenders board. The chairman will be the accounting officer. The head of the procurement office in that entity will serve as the secretary to the board, and then any other 4 heads of department in the procuring entity. So what it means is that the accounting officer takes responsibility for those that will carry on the activities of the procurement, the ministerial tenders board along with him or her. But I must state that sometimes you have assignments coming from departments whose heads are not part of that tenders board. At such cases, those heads of department can attend the tenders board, but they will still not be members of the tenders board. They don't have to sign the tenders board meeting. They will only attend to offer information as non-voting members during such meetings. And the tenders board as composed would serve for a year. At the end of every year or the beginning of a new year, the accounting officer has a right to either maintain the existing tenders board or change its composition in terms of the departments that are represented on the tenders board. The other committee, and the last one there, is the evaluation committee, the technical evaluation committee. The technical evaluation committee is a subcommittee of the tenders board. It means that all the activities and all the functions of this tenders committee will still be passed to the the activities of the evaluation committee will be passed to the tenders board to evaluate and ratify. The evaluation committee looks at the proposals submitted by your suppliers, contractors, or consultants to decide on the most responsive evaluated bidder, report to the tenders board for ratification. So at the end of the day, the decisions of the evaluation committee will be as taken by the tenders board. The tenders board takes responsibility for everything. So if the tenders board is not satisfied with the decision of the evaluation committee, the evaluation committee can be asked to go back and revisit the evaluation and come up with an acceptable report or decision. So by and large, the technical evaluation committee is a subcommittee of the tenders board of the MDA. The next thing you have here is just a schematic diagram of how the flow of the structures, institutional structures at the peak. We have the board. Next to it is the PPA itself, the Lagos State Public Procurement Agency, the procurement office in our various ministries, and then the accounting officer will come before the procurement office, the procurement planning committee, the ministerial tenders board, and then the evaluation committee. Here also we have, a table that delineates the responsibilities of the functions. For the governing board, we say that the governing board administers the affairs of the procurement agency. The procurement agency is charged with the responsibility of regulating all procurement activities and functions in the state. So further down the line, we see other responsibilities of the various institutional structure that we have in public procurement. For instance, for the tenders board, we say that the tenders board is the approving authority for the conduct of public procurement in the public sector. The procurement planning committee is responsible for the overall planning and preparation of the annual procurement plan, and they ensure adequate integration of the procurement plan, the procurement expenditure into the yearly budget of the procuring entity. So these are the responsibilities of the various stakeholders, or the various institutions rather, in our procurement process. For the composition we had mentioned earlier, the composition of the PPC, the Procurement Planning Committee, is the accounting officer who serves as the chairman. All heads of departments and units in the procuring entity, and then the head of the procurement unit or department serves as the secretary to the procurement planning committee. For the tenders board, the permanent secretary or any other accounting officer serves as the chairman. Any four heads of departments, those are directors in the MD, and then the procurement office serves as the secretary. Now, for the evaluation committee, I want to state that there are two types of evaluation committee, and I'll explain. You know, sometimes we allow you to do procurement processes without advertising it openly, say in the papers and all that, or on the website of the agency and your own website as well. Those forms of procurement process, we say, are not open competitive processes. Whereas sometimes it will be required by law that you advertise openly, open competitive process. So you put it in the dailies, you put it on the website, you put it on the notice board and all around. So if the process is open competitive, it will be required of the bidders to present documents that include their statement of accounts, their audited accounts, their tax status, and a couple of other things like that. They will also be requested or required to provide papers that speak to the status of their firm in terms of CSE registration, documents of their directors, ownership, and every other such things. So when we are engaging in open competitive process, all these forms of documents are required. We request that you include a financial function and the head of the legal unit of your entity in the procurement evaluation committee. I take that again. If your process is not open competitive, that means you don't need the bidders to submit their CAC, the audited account, and all such other documents. You would have only a 3-man evaluation committee. But if your process is open competitive, which means the bidders will be expected to submit or provide their legal document as to the CSC document and other forms of documents on their ownership forms, and then also provide some financial document like the audited account and stuff like that. So if it is open competitive and you're asking for these other sets of documents, then you would include your financial function meaning either the accountant or the auditor in the evaluation process, because you'll need them to look at the financial document that will be provided. You will also include the legal function of your entity in this evaluation process. So if it is open competitive process, you will have an evaluation committee of 5. If it is not open competitive, you have an evaluation committee of 3. 3 being the head of the procurement department, the head of the user department, and a subject matter expert. As we said, you can't shave my head behind me. So if I'm the one in need of the item that I want to acquire, it is only logical that I'll be involved in the evaluation of the bids that will lead to the acquisition of that item. Hence, you need the head of the user department in the evaluation committee. What we mean by a subject matter expert is that a couple of times you may have the user department not being an expert in that item that you are acquiring. For instance, if the PAU public affairs unit of your entity is in need of computer, the user department is the PAU because they're the ones that need that item. But the ICT of your entity will be there in the evaluation as subject matter expert because we'll expect the ICT man to give us technical input in the evaluation of that document or those documents submitted by the users, by the bidders. So you'll have the head of procurement unit, you'll have the user department, and then you'll have the subject matter experts. Even if the user department is an expert in that item, you will still need another subject matter expert so that it's not the only one that will just come and bamboozle us all on that item that he wants to procure. You have somebody else with whom will check and balance the decision of the head of the user department. So you would either have a 3-man or a 5-man evaluation committee. In all of these committees, it is expected that the head of procurement department will be the chairman of the evaluation committee. But we cannot go against the requirements of civil service rule, which means that if the head of the procurement department is not the most senior in this evaluation committee, the most senior will serve as the chairman of the committee, and the procurement head will remain as the secretary of that committee. And I'm sure with time, when we have enough of our very highly placed procurement officers as our heads of department, will not have issues as to seniority and the leadership or headship of the evaluation committee. So we quickly want to look at some of the principles and objectives of public procurement. We said it earlier that the main purpose of procurement is to achieve value for money, to get more value for money spent. And we also did say that in the days of, before the advent of public procurement, when we had our tenders board and the state tenders board, the STB, and the consultancy board, what we did then is that agencies or entities will just come up with most times 3 bidders with their quotations or their proposals for the consideration of the tenders board. But how did we come about those 3 bidders? A lot of times, those bidders will end up being 3 firms that belong to the same person, or that know themselves, or that have been spoken to. At the end of the day, you don't have real competition, because if 3 of us are bidding for a job and the 3 of us belong to the same firm or know ourselves, we would have concluded, okay, you bid 10 million, me, I'll bid 5 million, you will bid 15 million. And then, also let's more realistically, maybe 10, 12, 15. Knowing that the man that is bidding 10 will be the one that will be given the job, every other thing being equal. But do you know, even in that situation, that could be a job that might have been done for, say, 6 million or 7 million. But when you don't have competition, real competition, you would have situations where government will pay more than expected. Hence, what the World Bank decided earlier, that we lose money, we don't get value for money, we get only 30% of value for money spent. So some of all these principles that we have on the screen are the things that procurement expects us to abide by so that we would have value for money. Number 1 is accountability. Procurement expects that everything we do for the acquisition of goods, works, and services must be accountable. Everything must be properly documented. must be accountable. You must account for every kobo you spend. Then there has to be inclusiveness. I just said a while now that sometimes the three firms will be from the same person or the same group of companies. Procurement expects that there has to be inclusiveness. Inclusiveness meaning that every and anybody that is interested in doing the business should be allowed to partake in the business. There has to be inclusiveness for everyone. You don't shut out anyone that is interested in doing business with your MDA. There has to be transparency. Transparency, of course, is quite clear. Everything you do, you've got to make it transparent. You make it open. There's open disclosure of information. You don't hide information. There's nothing like this is for you and this is not for you. Every information that you play with, that you work with in procurement are subject to open scrutiny. So there should be transparency in what we do. And we ensure that we give every bidder equal opportunity to express themselves. There must be economy in what we do. Economy here meaning that you don't spend 100 million to chase 30 million. Because of this economy requirement or principle of procurement, sometimes we are allowed not to do open competitive bidding because we feel the funds involved, the threshold of the expenditure does not require that we go to the extent of advertising in the dailies and doing all other extensive form of procurement process. So economy here means that in everything we do, we are conscious to see that we are spending money that can be justified and we are not spending 10 naira to gain 2 naira. That's not economy. Openness, like I said, means that everything you do is open to everybody. You make your information available to all bidders. Same information. You don't hold back information from anyone. In fact, during our procurement process, if it is open, competitive, and advertised, if any of the bidders send any question for clarification, that same question and your response, your answer to that bidder must be shared with everybody that has picked the document that's involved in the process. So everything you do, you give everyone equal opportunity, same information, same chance to participate. The next thing there is auditable documentation. In procurement, we say that if it is not written, it is not done or it's not said. Everything you do must be clearly and properly documented and must be auditable. You document and will be open to audit. By the way, we have a procurement audit process. We call it procurement process review. And the law expects or gives provision that anything you do will be reviewed up to 10 years after the time those decisions are taken. So any procurement process you engage in 2025 can still be audited between 2025 and 2035, 10 years after the activity has taken place. In fact, I have witnessed in the Lagos House of Assembly where one of our retired engineers was invited to come and offer clarification even 3 years after his retirement on the activities that he partook in while he was still in service. So procurement expects us to do due diligence and do proper documentation because we can still be required to explain and offer clarification on these our activities and actions even 10 years after we've taken such activities, such decisions. Then, of course, we've talked about competition. You don't just go awarding straight to one person. Even though we have some procurement processes that we refer to as direct contracting and all such other things, by and large, the default mode of procurement is to do open competitive process. which means procurement, strongly encourages and supports competition. There has to be efficiency, there has to be integrity, and you must be fair to all concerned during our procurement process. So all these things we've gone through are what we refer to as the principles and the objectives of public procurement process. We quickly want to look at some of our procurement methods. So we'll start with, now, I said earlier that sometimes we allow open competitive bidding, and sometimes we have what we call restrictive bidding method. Restrictive meaning that you are not really going into full competition before you pick the most responsive evaluated bidder. At the peak of the open competitive bidding process is what we call international competitive bidding process, ICB. International competitive bidding process. The ICB, as the name implies, is a situation where you allow firms from outside the country to partake in your bidding process. We have international. Firm can be out there in Germany, in US, in Japan, or anywhere, even in Togo, nearby here, and they take part in your bidding process. We call that international competitive bidding process. There are rules guiding this process. The documents are tailored towards the achievement of the set goals in this ICB method. By the way, the essence of our bidding document is to communicate the requirements of the procuring entity to the bidders, to communicate on equal ground to all stakeholders, to all bidders. You state your requirements, you state the conditions of contract, you state the way you want to pay, and every other thing that concerns the process in view in our bid document. So that's why it is very essential to extend bid document. Even in some, not even some, even when it is not competitive, it is still expected that you extend the bid document to the bidders, because they still need to know a lot of the conditions surrounding the relationship they intend to engage with the bidders. So whichever one will always provide a bid document for the bidders. Next to the international competitive bidding is what we call the limited international bidding process. Limited international bidding process. This is still international, like the first one, but unlike the first one, it is not open to everyone. It is limited to certain companies or certain identified service providers. And I'll give an example. If, say, Lasut wants to acquire a new X-ray machine, you probably may not want to do open competitive bidding process. We may identify Philips, identify Siemens, identify one or two other leaders in that industry or that sector, and do what we call limited international bidding process with them. So we write to them directly, those identified 3, 4, or 5 or more bidders, and engage them in our bid process. Sometimes also, we may have a situation where those who are leaders and are the only ones producing the item you need internationally. So you go to them rather than just open your process to everyone, whereby you'll be bombarded with too much document and process, and everything will become so cumbersome for you to go through. So you can have limited international bidding process. The third in the open competitive process is the national competitive bidding process, which is very much like the international, just that in this case, it is restricted to firms that are registered within the country, and we see to be Nigerian-based companies. Those are companies that are involved in the national competitive bidding process. So those are the three major selection or procurement methods for open competitive bidding processes. For the restrictive bidding processes, as the name goes, we have reasons to curtail or restrict the bidders that we'll be dealing with in our proposed bidding process. Top of it is what we call the restrictive tendering process. The next to it is the selective tendering process. We'll look at these two together so that we can appreciate the divide, the difference between both of them. In the restrictive tendering process and the selective tendering process, you would have determined ab initio the number of firms you want to invite, and you only speak to them, only those ones. You are not opening it to everybody. You just pick 3, 4, or 5 firms, and you interact with only them, invite only those selected firms for the bidding process. Now, the difference between restrictive process and the selective process is that you have for selective tendering process, you are engaging contractors or bidders that you know, all of them are very similar. The difference in their prices and the quality of their work is not substantially different. It means that any 3 or 4 can represent the entire sector or the entire market. I give an example of that. If you want to buy bottled water, whether you buy Seaway, you buy Nestle, or any of the other major names, they will all be giving you basically the same product. Maybe a bit of difference in quality and then the price. Or say you want to buy stationaries from A1 or whichever one, most of them, they still give you close to the same quality of work. Or sometimes you want to do a renovation of your building, and you know firms that are within the same category in terms of their quality of work, their speed of work, the expertise they own, and their costing. They are all similar. So you can just pick 3 or 4 to represent that whole spectrum. And you say you've done selective tendering because any one of them would be a fair representative of the entire sector. So when you pick any 3, 4, or 5 from such a spectrum, you are engaging in what we call selective tendering process. But for restrictive tendering, which is similar to it, you are still picking a few. But in this case, you are looking at only those who can perform high quality, expensive, and intricate services or contracts. For instance, if Lagos State wants to build a bridge now over a particular junction and all that, we are not going to open it to every firm that is a construction firm. We'll probably restrict to those we know can do what we want. Hence, we pick just Julius Berger, CCCC, High Tech, and maybe 1 or 2 others. That is restrictive because we are just playing or we are just engaging with those few we know can offer the service we need. So you do selective tendering for complex, high-value procurement processes, whereas you do selective tendering for everyday, low-volume procurement processes. That's selective tendering. The next is direct contracting. Direct contracting means it's a process where you avoid or you don't go through competition in picking or awarding a procurement process or procurement award to the service provider, it means that you have determined on your own who you want to, the firm or the bidder you want to play with or you want to engage in the process you have in hand. Now, there are reasons why we want to do this rather than go through competition. One of the very important reasons we do direct contracting is that sometimes you have a sole producer, the only person or the only source where you can get that service or that product that you are in need of. So you do direct contracting. For example, the state advise or encourage us to do direct contracting with Lagos State Printing Corporation when we want to do any printing job. Also, we are advised to procure diesel and petroleum products from Ibile Holdings. These are firms that for regulatory reasons we want to do business with without competition. Sometimes even when it's not regulatory constraints, you want to do direct contracting if you can get to the major manufacturers. For example, if you want to buy Toyota vehicle, if you go to Globe Motors, you can't get it better because they are one of the direct manufacturers representative in Nigeria. So if you have the direct or the sole producer of that item, you can do direct contracting because there's no point, nobody can compete with the main producer anyway, because he will still give you the best price. Another reason you do direct contracting is when you are having a follow-up to an initial competitive process, then you can do direct contracting. An example of that is that when you've already gone through proper competitive process to choose a firm that will supply you maybe the chairs in your conference room, and you had initially ordered or given award for the procurement of, say, 20 of such chairs. You find out or you discover that you need another 5 to make it 25. You don't need to go through another procurement process for the extra 5. You do direct contracting with the firm that is already engaged to supply 20. But that is when that firm will not be changing its price. Because some firms, if they know that you are constrained to them and you are giving them by direct contracting, they will begin to introduce other new conditions. It's no longer the price of before and all that. Once you change your price, you would be exposed to competition. Another reason for direct contracting is when it's a follow-up. When it's a follow-up assignment, you can do direct contracting. So for instance, you've awarded the construction of the road from Ikeja to Allen to a firm. Then suddenly or later you discover that, or you agree that you want to continue that road from Allen Junction to Radio Junction or to Obafemi or even to the Secretariat. If you are comfortable with the quality of work and the cost of the first award from Ikeja Under Bridge to Allen, you can go on by direct contracting to award the next phase to the firm that is already on site with you. So you can have direct contracting for such reasons. The other one, the last one there, is what we call direct labor or force accounts. This is a situation where the procuring entity itself has adequate personnel and equipment to carry out the job at hand, and then you do it. Now, direct labor applies to only works. You can't have direct labor for goods, and you can't have direct labor for services. Direct labor is only for works engagement, and that's where the procuring entity has in-house ability in terms of personnel and equipment to carry out that job. I always use the example of the time that Ministry of Works carried out the painting of the offices, the blocks in the secretariats, applying civil servants who are painters and have the necessary skills and equipment to do the trade, the painting, rather than award the contract. The state bought the equipment, bought the paint and even some of the other equipment they needed, and then painters who are civil servants did the job by direct contracting. So you can have direct contracting for work, but nothing like direct contracting or direct purchasing for goods. The next is to look at those things we call, the processes we call selection of consultants. Now, the procurement method we just spoke to a while ago will apply to both goods and works procurement. But for services, where we have consulting services and non-consulting services, we have what we call selection methods. And their processes are quite different from what we have for goods and works. The default selection method at the top of it all is what we call the quality cost-based selection method, QCBS. In this process, we will look at or we will consider both the technical proposal of the consultant and the financial proposal of the consultant to determine the most suitable consultant to award our process to, our services to. So for quality cost-based selection method, both the technical and the financial proposals will be taken into consideration. And they will be judged, or they will be mixed. They have a mix that you would have predetermined. A lot of times it's usually 60-30, 60-40 or 70-30. That's weighting between the quality and the technical and the financial. The next method, selection method, is what we call the quality-based selection method. For this one, we're only looking at the technical proposal. The cost they are bringing will not play any part. We would be awarding our contract or be opening the bid of the highest rank technical proposal. We open the financial bid of only the highest ranked technical proposal, and we negotiate with that firm. The financial price presented by that firm. The financial is not as important as the technical in this process. The third one is what we call the single source selection method. This is something akin to the direct contracting. This is when you are tied to just a particular service provider or consultant. You don't have the opportunity of comparing, the proposals of more than one consultant. It's just one consultant you have, and you engage in what we call the single source selection method. The next is the least cost. The least cost selection method is the method that requires that you only engage the man that gives you the least or the best financial proposal. This method is only applied for processes that what you want to do is very clear and well known, and that any consultant that you engage will do pretty much the same thing. Therefore, straightforward and not complex assignment, such that whether I give it to consultant A, B, or C, they will all pretty well do the same work for you. So you want to award to only the firm that gives you the least cost. The next one by it there is the fixed cost. Unfortunately, instead of going to another line, he's staying by his brother least cost. Fixed budget selection method is another type of selection method for consultants. In this case, you would expose your budget, your available budget to the consultant, and then they will give you proposal of what they can do with that money. So it's like you give two women 100,000 to go to the market. The woman that brings you more quality products or more value for that 100,000 is the one you pick. That's fixed budget. So you tell them the budget and they come up with the proposal of what they can do with that money, and the consultant with the best technical proposal of the fixed budget is the one you pick. Consultant qualification is an institution where the firm is being picked based on their qualification, based on their qualification. So you say that because this consultant is a specialist in this area and is the one you're only going to deal with. You don't want to expose him to competitors who are not experts in that field. So you have a way to deal with such firms, negotiate their financials, and finally agree on what you can all stand by. You can also have individual consultants. So these are individuals who don't need to register as a firm, but are allowed to provide services. A lot of times, these are consulting services, not non-consulting services, that will come up as individual consultants. So quickly, we want to look at disposal, which is the last topic before we round up this presentation. We had said earlier that every procuring entity is a disposing entity. Every firm that has a right to procure goods, works, and services can dispose of the procured goods, works, and services. Disposal, we need to state, is not only restricted to destructive discardment of the item. When you hear disposal, what comes to your mind is what is of no value again, and you are just throwing it away. You don't need anything out of it. That is not the definition of disposal in procurement. You get to see later towards the end when we look at some of these disposal methods. But suffice it to state that disposal in procurement only means that you are transferring the usage of an item from one point or one office or one MDA to another. And in doing this, we have procedures for it. Because we know that most of the time, the items we are disposing will still have some level of value in them. We would have to get the reserve value from the Office of Valuation. In the case of our MDAs in Alausa here, for local government, they go to the local government Auditor General Service for the reserve price, and then we'll go on with our disposal processes. Funds that are made, that are accrued from disposal, are recorded into the books of the entity as income. And then according to the requirements, the manuals, implementation manuals of procurement in Lagos State, office furnitures of values of 200,000 and above will need to come to the agency, the procurement agency, for one form of approval or another before you can dispose of them. But those non-furniture items of values from 50,000 and above will also come to the agency. So if it's furniture and it's valued below 20,000, you can carry out disposal in your entity without coming to the agency. But in all cases, you will need to document appropriately for further reviews by the agency. Like I said earlier, funds coming in from disposal are strictly seen as income to the agency. They will be properly documented and, taken into consideration in everything you do. That you do all other necessary procedures for disposal. A lot of times you solicit for purchasers to bid for those items. Then the man that bids the highest price, which is converse to when you are procuring. When you are procuring, you pick the lowest price. The one you are disposing, you pick the highest price that you have. And you do all that with the approval of the tenders board before you can give out the documents. So let's quickly look at a few of our disposal methods. One, you can dispose by sales by public tender, which is the open competitive. You put out the item and you allow public tenders to come in from bidders as to the item, the price they want. They feel they can pick the item that is out for disposal. You can have sales by public auction, where you can invite an auctioneer to do the auctioning process to dispose of your item. You can have tradings. Tradings means that you can take this item back to the producer, add a little money to it or whatever as the case may be, for them to give you a higher quality of that or a higher version of that item. You can have trade by financial discount. You can have sales, fixed price sales. You can have sales to employees. This sales to employees is the one we apply most when we are disposing of our official vehicle in Alausa. Say you are boarding your vehicle to those who are using it. You allow the users to have what we call the right of first refusal. So if you want to board your vehicle, official vehicle, the man that is using it is allowed to have the right of first refusal. That means if he's able to pay at least the amount that is given as a reserve value for that product, is allowed to pick it without competition. But if he's not able to pay that price, then you can make it open to other officers. You can have recycling or donation. Then you can have the last set are the ones that we usually refer to as disposal. That's when you have destruction, dumping, burying, or burning. But suffice it to say that disposal is not restricted to only this last type of disposal method. Because we know we are only preparing for our promotions and not a professional exam in procurement, these are the things I feel we should have in mind or be conversant with. But we'll want to listen to, I want to take questions on whatever other areas you think you're interested in and you want me to shed light on, either on what we've spoken to now or any other topics that I have not mentioned and you think you would want us to look at and shed more light on. So we welcome contributions, questions, and all. Now, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So, questions. Unmute yourself. Question, please.
Any questions? When we don't have questions, it's one of two things. It's either I didn't do well and you don't understand what I've said, or it's too simple and everything is well taken in. Which of the two? Or add mixture of both? Questions, contributions.
Hello. Can we hear you?
You can unmute, or maybe you want me to start calling
some of us randomly.
Hello? Can you hear? Okay, once you unmute everyone.
Mrs. Adelaja. Okay, Mr. Lukman
Sir.
Onikeku, go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes, sir. In the course of your lecture, sir, you said the governing board of the PPA are three executive members. That is HC Justice, HCMF, and HC Finance. You now mentioned that the other members. I couldn't get that, please. Can you repeat that for me, sir, or for us, sir?
All right, thank you. So the composition of the governing board, we have three executive council members, HC Justice, HC MEPB, HC Finance, who is the board chairman. We have the Director General of PPA as the secretary. And then we have three other members from outside representing professional bodies, NGOs, and other non-governmental organizations and other such firms. So those ones are three, with the three members from the board, from the ESCO, that's six, and then the secretary, who is the Director General of the Public Procurement Agency. Is that okay, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Get it.
More question, please. Mrs. Adelaja.
Thank you very much, our honorable coordinator. Thank you, Mr. Subair, for this presentation. I want to ask a question. We have some of these your procurement officers that bamboozle us here. If you want to procure any item that is above 10 million, that is below 10 million, sorry, do we need to do any PPA?
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, go on.
That's it, sir.
All right, thank you. Your question is a very germane question now. So I'll explain what we mean by, or the divide we have on 10 million. For procurement processes of values below 10 million, we refer to them as post-review procurement processes. But from 10 million and above, we refer to them as prior review procurement processes, which means that any procurement process from 10 million and above, you have recourse to go to the agency, that's to PPA, for approval instrument stepwise. That means before you commence, when you take a decision that we want to adopt this procurement, and this is the process, and these are the people we want to invite, or this is the method we want to adopt, you would go to the agency for clarification and approval. So they give you what we call approval instrument, what we call no objection. If it is below 10 million, you can do everything you want to do and document without going to the PPA for any form of no objection. But your expenditure being post-review, which means you don't go to PPA, does not negate any other part of the procurement process. That means you will still extend documents to service providers. They will still return their bids. You will still evaluate and do every other thing, and your MTB will approve before you award. In fact, the service providers will still need to be registered service providers, because these are what we call eligibility criteria. These are reasons, these are the qualities that they need to meet for them to partake in the procurement process. They will still have to meet them. But you may not need to come or approach the agency for clearance before you do the job end to end. But whatever you do, you'll document appropriately and await the procurement process review that will come up later from the agency. Then maybe I should take this opportunity to list our document, our approval instruments. Number one, we have what we call the no objection, letter of no objection. I think this is something I should have mentioned earlier. We have the letter of no objection. Letter of no objection is just a clearance for you to either go to the next level in the procurement process or sometimes to award a contract. So if your process was not competitive, if it's a direct contracting process, you will be issued a no objection to award. If your process was not competitive, you'll be issued a no objection to award. Another form of our paper, our document, approval instrument, is what we call the letter of confirmation. Letter of confirmation is issued when the agency is satisfied that funds can be released to your MDA for procurement processes, for expenditures that are not procurable. Now, being procurable means that you don't have options to compete or use service providers. If our officers are going on training, say engineers going to current training or NSC conference or ANAN and every other thing, these are expenditures, or even you want to pay some of our hard work staff for such expenditure, we say they are not procurable because you are not thinking of whether you are giving a service provider. They are not procurable. A service provider is not involved. In such cases, funds will be released directly to your MDA. So you can get a letter of confirmation when you are engaging in non-procurable assignments. The next one is when we give you the certificate of compliance, COC. COCs are issued at the end of a competitive process. So if you approach the agency, run a complete procurement process through to award stage, when it is competitive between two or more service providers, the final document that will be released to you, that will be issued to your MDA before you award a COC, certificate of compliance, a COC, a certificate of compliance. The fourth one is what we call confirmation for SMEs. In an attempt to make life easier, because we always say that procurement that makes life more difficult for anybody is not procurement. There are times when we allow funds to be issued or released to your firm for you to do procurement internally. So we'll give you a letter of confirmation for SMEs. So we are saying that we are not waiting for you to do the process and we release funds to the service provider. A lot of times when the funds are of low threshold, 12 million, 8 million, 15 million, depending on what you want to use the money for, we can sometimes allow, the agency can sometimes issue you or give you what we call confirmation for SMEs, in which case funds are released to you for the procurement department or procurement unit in your ministry to do the procurement process, and you pay from your account department. So these are the documents that you can obtain from PPA. But for clarity or for to further stress, when you are carrying out procurement processes below 10 million, it is expected that you can do everything end to end in your MDA, and you document, pay from your MDA, and then the agency will come up later to review your document. But then all necessary procurement processes will still be followed. The firm will be registered as expected. Award letters will be issued after registration of award letter with PPA, and every other thing you do with PPA. I hope I've made that clarification there.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Other questions? Mr. Ahmed Kotun, no question.
Thank you. For now, no questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Àwọn threshold yẹn kọ́ ṣé wọ́n lè list ẹ̀ fún wa ni?
Which are the thresholds, ma'am?
Your procurement threshold, maybe from 500 to 1 million is so. I know I've heard something about the threshold before.
Okay, the most important threshold for you to know is that the one I just mentioned now, expenditures below 10 million, we say they are post-review procurement processes. Then from 10 million and above, they are prior review threshold. The other thing you want to know probably is that for now, by law, every procurement from 100 million and above should be competitive and open competitive at that. That means you must advertise. But the law allows the agency to issue further guidelines and operational manual. So in the operational manual we have now, you will find situations where the agency can allow you to do procurement processes that are more than 100 million without having to advertise it. That's why you will approach the agency for clearance and no objection before you do some of such things. But if you stay strictly by the current law, we are saying that any procurement from 100 million and above for construction, you must advertise. But now we allow even up to 200 million sometimes without open competitive, without advertisement. But that has been done by applying the provisions of the law that allows the agency to amend or issue further guidelines to the thresholds from time to time. Because these thresholds can change from time to time, that's why you need to approach the agency for no objection. But the standing one that is not changing is the fact that 10 million and above is considered as a prior review threshold. You must approach the agency before you take your steps from point to point and get appropriate procurement approvals or approval instruments before you continue. And then maybe you're also referring to the stages or categories for registration of our contractors. That's another thing altogether. Category A, B, C down the line for contractors, but I don't think that's the one you are referring to. Okay,
Yes.
that is not primarily your responsibility now. But I think for assignments of 0 to 50 million, that's category A. 50 million to 100 million is category B. Except you want to register contracts now, that's why you need this. It's the responsibility of our contractor registration department to check all this along with other requirements for firms to be registered. Then I think category C is up to 150 million and all the way down like that. But that's for registration. So a firm at the time of registering, so it's like if I say if two firms register for supplies or for construction, one registers say category G, which is up to I think 10 billion, and another person is registering for category C, which is like 150 million. So what it means is that we would have checked the man in category D and category G to ensure that he has the required equipment and personnel to do jobs of that amount. That's what that means. So it is clearly what you call vendor classification, to say this is what this vendor can do. You cannot play beyond this stage. You can play up to this stage. That is vendor categorization. That will not be much of your assignment because you are not vendors yourself. You're expected to know what we do from our own end as civil servants, not as service providers. Any further questions, please?
Yeah, Mrs. Mituno. Mrs.
Good,
Elliott, do
good
you have
evening.
anything for us?
Michelle, tell the slides to be sent because this one, I'm just wondering which will be applicable to us as admin strategists. Maybe like because procurement is not really our own thing, so I think
I got your question right.
likely questions. I mean,
The likely questions, that's why the things I've just run through are the everyday procurement things. What do we expect to know as non-procurement officers, but as stakeholders in the procurement process? What are the different methods? What are the compositions of the different threshold? Who sits?
also because of the technicality of it, I would have, from my own point, it would have been better appreciated in the morning class.
Membership of the different committees, the responsibilities of the different committees, the framework for procurement in our MDAs. What exactly is the meaning of procurement? What is the process? Well, you start with planning, you go to all the lines, approach the markets, evaluate, award contracts, and all that. Knowing what disposal is all about, and maybe some of the disposal methods as mentioned. Those are the things I believe you could be asked, because you can't be challenged or queried on issues that are very technical in procurement. You are not procurement officers, just the everyday procurement requirement for you to be responsive to the requirement or adoption of procurement in our various MDAs. When can you do direct contracting? What's the meaning of direct contracting? What's the meaning of direct labor? When can you do direct labor? And such things. I believe these are the areas that you can expect questions during promotion exercises.
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Question. Mrs. Alako. Is Mr. Muritala here?
Letter of objection, letter of confirmation.
Mrs. Anoko.
Confirmation of settlements.
Okay, if you don't have questions for me, let me ask you a question. And whoever gets it will collect something from Mr. Jamiu. If you find the advert for a procurement process on your notice board, what process is it likely to be? If you find the advert of your procurement process on your notice board, what procurement method is it likely to be? Is it selective tendering? Is it national shopping? Is it international competitive bidding? Out of these three, which one are you likely to find on your notice board?
Mrs. Owokorodu. Unmute yourself.
I think it's the competitive bidding.
Which of them?
Competitive bidding, sir.
Yeah, competitive bidding, you are right. So it could be either NCB, National
National competitive bidding.
You can also find the international competitive bidding on your notice board. The reason I asked this question is that the
Mrs. Omoyemi, you want to try? Unmute yourself.
I said national competitive.
yeah, she has done that. So the reason I asked the question is that it's easy for us to feel that because it's on the board is the lowest rank of it, which is the selective tendering method. But if you look at it properly, the selective tendering method will not be on the board because you already know the 3 or 4 that you want, the 3 or 4 bidders you want to play with, you want to engage, and you send your solicitation document straight to them. You don't put that on the board. It is the competitive ones, like you have noted, the national competitive process and the international competitive process that you'll find on the notice board. That was a good attempt. Thank you.
More questions, sir.
More questions. I'm not the one asking you questions. I'm just thinking of what you should know. All right. So let's see now. Let's go to something concerning the tenders board. Which of these two is a subcommittee of the tenders board? The procurement planning committee or the evaluation committee? Which of them is a subcommittee of the tenders board? The procurement planning committee or the evaluation committee?
The evaluation committee.
Correct. That's fine.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Please send my gift to Mr. Jamiu, Mrs. Adelaja. God has.
All right, he will deliver it. All right, let me just think of one more so that I will go if you don't have any other thing for me. Who heads the evaluation committee? Who is the chairman of the evaluation committee?
The procurement officer.
Okay. Final answer?
Yes, sir. Or the most senior person in the committee.
That's better. That's better. The most senior officer in the committee heads the the evaluation committee. If the procurement officer is not the most senior, some other person there can head. Yeah. So you see, it's pretty straightforward, and I believe you will not have issues with the procurement section of your promotion exercise. I wish you all the best, and we'll all come out in flying colors. But between now and when you'll be having the exams, I'm only a call away through Mr. Jami if you have any other areas you want to clarify before your exams. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
sir. God bless you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.